know the love of Christ, Ephesians 3:19.
To know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge is one of the things that the Apostle Paul prays for the Christians in Ephesus. It's something that we should strive for as well. That is why this podcast is called To Know the Love of Christ. Each episode, we will study Scripture in its context, but also dive deep to find the love of Christ, a love so fervent, so honest, and so faithful that it's the very essence of his being.
We invite you
To know the love of Christ. Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks again for joining us here at To Know the Love of Christ. I'm Brittany.
I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Dee.
And on our last episode, we finished up chapter 1 of Ephesians, verses 15 through 23. And we discussed our reputation as individuals and as a congregation and why it matters. We also talked about prayer for the church. And then if you all remember, I also asked a very personal question to some extent. If you prayed like you're supposed to in your personal life, would anyone's lives, be affected by it? So if you have your Bibles with you, you can open with us to Ephesians chapter 2, and today we're going to be discussing verses 1 through 10.
Great, thank you, Brittany. Just like she said, we completed chapter 1 and also included God's plan for his church from before the foundation of the world, the spiritual blessings that are in Christ in his church, one of which was prayer, like she said. And now Paul goes into who is saved in this plan and how they are saved. All right, so these verses 1 through 3 to me is kind of deep and dark. Stephanie, if you can you read that for us, please?
Yes. All right. And you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, like the rest of mankind.
Great, thank you. If you notice, he says, he addresses you, you being the Christians in Ephesus, of course, but he says, he made alive. So he's talking about Jesus here. This is where I think it gets kind of deep and dark. Is he says, you were dead in trespasses and sins. So to be in sin is death. Now, we all sin, and obviously our bodies are still alive. So obviously Paul is talking about spiritual death here. So Jesus, he says, is life. So to live spiritually, one has to be made alive through Christ. Y'all have anything to add here?
Well, when I read it, you just think about sin being death or sin equaling death. And like you said, it's a spiritual death because everybody dies. So this is more of a spiritual death. Your soul will no longer, it will live for eternity, but in torment and in pain. There will be no happy days for you. And so I also thought about, I kind of get what you're saying about the dark part because it seems kind of messed up that like Adam and Eve did this and now we all have to suffer
right, yeah.
because of them. And so I had thought about Romans 5, beginning with verse 12, therefore just as sin came into the world through one man and death through sin. And so death spread to all men because all sinned. It's just kind of like, man, Adam, Eve, you guys really messed it up for us. And it's just because it's interesting to see that just because of this one man, now all of humanity is affected by this one individual sin. And obviously we have free will, we have our choices. And so now it's left up to us to a certain extent to decide whether or not we want to live eternally, spiritually, or be dead for all eternity, right, spiritually, So, yeah, that was kind of... I see the dark part in there.
Yeah. And you brought up a good part. We're going to touch on that about Adam and Eve and what they did. We're going to touch on that in a little bit. Stephanie, you got something to add?
I think, at least personally, I know for me, it's hard for me to really comprehend how drastic that transformation is. When we think about death, to be dead and to come alive is a resurrection of sorts, which if you ever saw resurrection, your mind would be completely blown. I mean, am I living in such a way that I have been resurrected? I think about that. And if I'm not, when I turn back to that old life after I've been resurrected, it's basically like crawling back in a grave and burying myself alive, which seems completely ridiculous. And we would never do that physically. But I feel like, you know, 1 John aside, where if we're walking in the light, we have fellowship with him and his blood continually cleanses us as long as we're staying on that path. But at some point, some of us turn away from that and we aren't walking in the light. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're burying ourselves alive. And you connect it back. Another note, you connect it back to the first chapter and you think about how sweet and wonderful those blessings are. And the light has to have the darkness to be able to be seen. You know, it doesn't seem as bright without darkness. We don't understand how wonderful those blessings are without contrasting those to the darkness in our lives. And if we're not careful, I think we can miss out on blessings. We don't view them the way we should or appreciate them as much when we don't appreciate where we came from.
And that would be the end of the episode. You just covered everything I wanted to cover. No, but yeah, we're going to go into a whole lot of what you just said in the upcoming verses because Paul gets into that too. So verse 2, you know, he says, in which you once walked according to the course of this world. So that implies a change in path, your pathway, a change in how the world goes because the world's way is death. So, you know, we have to change our way. And like in verse 3, I like how Paul is including himself in this. He says, we all. It's like he's saying, hey, I'm just like you, you know. It's, you know, we all once conducted ourselves. How? What are the ways that the world conducts its ways? You know, he goes into the lust of the flesh, the fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and we're by nature children of wrath. What would you say the lusts of the flesh are? I mean, this is obviously something we have to avoid. We have to make sure we don't go down. So what do you
mean like some examples
of
the lust of the flesh?
I mean, you know, the first thing you think of, you think sexual sins. At least I think sexual sins. But, I mean, there's more to it than that. So what would be some other lusts of the flesh? Good.
I like to look at different versions. So I looked up a few different versions on that phrase, you know, lust of the flesh. Some of them said cravings of our flesh or passions of our flesh. And really I guess in my own mind, the way I think of it is anything of a physical nature that prevents me from obeying God as I should. And anything that I would crave above service to God. So whether that's watching TV too much or reading filthy literature or, you know, I love food. So even the thought of, you know, am I obsessed with food and, you know, I can't study because I'm always thinking about the next meal? Am I always constantly eating? And, you know, if you look at me, I can answer, yes, I do constantly eat. There's no secret there. And there's nothing wrong with loving food, you know, but anything that comes in the way physically before God. And when I was studying, I went to 1 Corinthians 6 and that passage there, 9 through 11. And in my mind, I was focusing more on verse 11, which says, and such were some of you, but you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. But there it talks about sexual immorality, idolatry, adultery, homosexuality, thieves, so people that steal things, and all that. That in my mind, that's the passage that I linked it to, because those all are lust of the flesh to me.
Brittany?
What do I add to that?
Well, yeah, true. I thought Philippians 2:3, it says, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each other esteem others better than himself. So I think if we elevate ourselves over others, that could be a selfish or lust of the flesh.
So, lust of the flesh, you know, I was kind of thinking like immediately like you do, like the first thing that comes to mind is, you know, sexual immorality. But then I thought about Galatians 5:19 through 20, and 21 as well. And it gives you a clear, now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. So it's much more than just the sexual side of things. And I think, Stephanie, the definition that you gave, for lust of the flesh was a very good one. You said the physical desire of something. Is that how you put it?
Yeah, desire for anything. And really, it goes past kind of what you're talking about, past that physicality.
Mm-hmm.
It's just worldliness.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that's seeking out worldliness above godliness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a much more succinct way to put it.
So also in that verse it says, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind. So it's also a mental change we have to make, because like Jesus said in Luke 6:45, the last part of it says, for out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks. So our mind, our heart, is that mental part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I've also thought of in Luke, Jesus says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. So the change of the physical change is obvious, but the mental, even Jesus says it himself, you got to change your mind, change your heart, follow me completely and totally. So anything, like you said, Stephanie, that goes in front of God, that prevents us from being closer to him, is the change that Paul is speaking of here. What do you think Paul means when he says we're by nature children of wrath, just as the others? Are our sins passed down, like you mentioned about Adam and Eve, or are we just doomed with no hope? Why would he say this, you think?
Well, I can say what I know. It's not in support of the original sin theory. Mm-hmm. Thinking that we were inheriting our sin and we're born to be sinful. We know that that's not true because of other verses. So I know what it's not. Do you know what it is, Brittany?
Well, I definitely know we're not doomed without any hope, because if that were the case, then what would be the point of living the Christian life, or even wanting to become a Christian?
Right.
I'm walking this walk, talking this talk, and following, a man who claims to be the Messiah, but I don't know that he can really do anything for me. You get what I'm saying? So we definitely know we're not doomed with hope. There is hope, or else God would not have sent Jesus for us. But we're the children of wrath, not that we inherited sin from Adam and Eve, but because of their sin, now all of mankind knows what sin is. Because, if we go back to Genesis and we read, and I don't have it pulled up right now. If somebody wants to pull it up at some point, or, you can go back and check that later. But when you read back in Genesis, and it talks about how, Adam and Eve were walking in the garden. They were naked. They weren't even ashamed. They didn't know what that was. To them, everything was good. And then the moment that Eve ate of the fruit, all of a sudden her eyes were open. And all of a sudden she realized what good and bad was. She realized deceit on behalf of the serpent. So when I think of children of wrath, I think that's more of what I believe it to be. The original parents of us all, Adam and Eve, like I said earlier, messed it up for us. And now because of that, every individual knows what sin is, and every individual has to die physically, but by the grace of God, which I'm not trying to jump ahead too much, but by the grace of God, we don't have to die spiritually.
Yeah, very good. That's what I was going for. Good. Thank you. All right, so moving on. Stephanie, did you have something you wanted to add? Okay. So moving on, verses 4 through 7. Now, these verses are packed full. While 1 through 3 is deep and dark, these verses bring us out of that darkness from the weight of sin, and it reveals more of God to us. It's like a crescendo to verse 10. So like verse 4, it starts off with but. So right there it tells you it's a contrast. It's a contrast from the dark world and all its sin and trespasses to God. So it's kind of an attention getter, But so what it reveals is that God is rich in mercy. That's wonderful. But let me ask you this: what is mercy?
When you ask that question, y'all know that verse in Matthew 9:13. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. It's like, okay, D. I think.
See, I'm being more Christ-like.
I think mercy is holding back the full punishment that someone deserves. So, for instance, there have been a couple times when Hiram and I will discipline the kids. And because I'm home, I'm more of the disciplinary. I'm probably the bad parent most times. And so every now and then I'll hear Hiram getting on to the kids, and then he'll say, I'm going to show you some mercy. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What? It's just like, I'm going to show you some mercy. And I just take that as, okay, Andre or Nadia, y'all did something that you knew was wrong. You deserve to be punished or disciplined however we see fit to do that, but I'm gonna show you some mercy. I'm gonna kind of let it slide, and I'm gonna let you have a second chance at this, and prayerfully you will get it right the next time. So that's how I think of mercy.
Right, and that's kind of what I wrote. When I was setting this out, I put withholding justice or showing kindness by withholding justice. It's kind of wiping the slate clean instead of holding someone accountable, I guess. I don't know if that's the word I want to use. Holding something against them because they earned it. We'll talk about grace later and how it's something we don't deserve. Justice is something that we've earned when we've done wrong. That wrongdoing, mercy requires wrongdoing. You can't give mercy without something being done before that. And we've not earned the mercy, just like we haven't earned the grace, but we've definitely earned the justice on that end. I have done something and it requires justice, and Christ in dying fulfilled all that, and God allowing that to happen, that sacrificial love provides mercy for us.
Okay, yeah.
I feel like that was really convoluted.
But I think I get that, because at some point, okay, so it's like mercy. I think when you really think about mercy, it's kind of hard to think about that word without overlapping with compassion. So,
Right.
So it's like I'm showing you mercy, but it's also a form of compassion.
Right.
Like Psalm 51, 1 and 2. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy. Blot out my transgressions, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. Not that I'm trying to change the Bible or anything, but if you were to take out that word mercy and put compassion there, have compassion on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant compassion. Blot out my transgression, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. So I think mercy, it's at least to me, and I was kind of hearing what Stephanie was saying as well. I feel like we're saying mercy, but I also feel like it's compassion as well. Like you can't have or can't show mercy towards one another if you didn't have compassion for that person. You get what I'm saying? Because I love my kids, but if I didn't love them, if I didn't care anything about them, who cares about showing them mercy? I have no compassion for them. I have no love for them. So, I'm going to discipline you just because I can,
Right.
But it's like, and even when you think about God He can do that. He can discipline us just because he can, and because, like Stephanie was saying, we are justified in the punishment that comes to us. But because of his compassion, because of his love for us, that allows us to get this mercy, this withholding, with him withholding a certain punishment from us.
And I think also about Micah 6:8. I love that verse. It's on the back of my car. Where it says, he has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God, which some, like ESV, actually switches that out for kindness. But I'm supposed to love mercy. And that's not so easy when it's someone that's done something against you. It's really easy to say, please show me mercy. Please show my loved ones mercy, God. But that guy over there, he totally messed up. He deserves what's coming to him.
Yeah.
But we're called to have that compassion. I had written down that mercy requires strength, compassion, and empathy. And I have to be able to empathize with that person that has done something that requires that mercy, because I'm right in the same boat. And my life is just a big, long panoramic view of where I require mercy, because I'm human and God knows I need that. And that's why, we go back to chapter 1 and it talks about everything that he set ahead of time into motion. And I think about James 2, verse 13, where it says, for judgment is without mercy to one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. I just love that verse.
Yeah, I don't blame you. It's a good one. Both of what you said brings us to the second part of that verse. Because of his great love, with which he loved us. It is because of his love. Like Brittany said, if she didn't love her kids, she wouldn't show mercy. If you didn't have compassion, what we deserve is death. Right. We are dead in our trespasses. We deserve that. We deserve eternal punishment for putting everything before God. But because he loves us, we are spared. We are shown his mercy.
Right.
Good. Verse 5. He starts off with the word even. To me, this is an emphasis on the extreme. So like we, even in our filthy sins, and we're dead, we've died, he made us alive. He saved us with Christ. So by grace, and if you notice in parentheses, by grace you have been saved. So we'll go into more detail about this, but let me ask you, can we know, and do you believe that those who are dead in sin, are made alive in Christ? I mean, can we know that? Like, not you in particular, but can we know that? Can we be sure of that? I mean, it's a simple yes or no, I guess, right?
Yes.
Yes.
You're looking at me like, what? I'm establishing something here because we're going to go into the next few verses where I'm going to take your yes and we're going to discuss that, okay?
Okay.
So verse 6, he talks about, and raised us up together and made us sit together in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus. So raised up, so Jesus was raised up from the dead, so we are also raised up from the death of sin, sitting together in heavenly places. So throughout this book, throughout Ephesians, heavenly places is mentioned. For example, like chapter 1, verse 20 says that he is seated at the right hand of God. What are the heavenly places? We think, okay, it's heaven, but we're not sitting together right now with him in heavenly places. Any thoughts on that?
Please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But when I sit here and I kind of ponder on it, I'm thinking, what about the church? What about the church? It's like when it's all said and done, if we're all individually living our lives according to the will of God like we're supposed to, if we're living righteously and continue to walk in the light, these individuals that I worship with, and with consistently, I'm probably spending more time with members of the congregation than I am with my own family. This is a picture, so to speak, of what heaven is going to look like. And so when I think about the heavenly places, I think about the church. Like, these are the people that I'm going to be in heaven with. When we're together, it's laughing, it's fun, we enjoy one another's company, we're encouraging one another, we're praying for one another. Like, this is just a heavenly thing. And when you think about that word heavenly, taking it away from the actual place, when you just heavenly, it's just beautiful. It's just, it's just, it's just beautiful. And when you think about the heavenly places here on earth right now, church, I'm going to spend the rest of my life, my spiritual life in heaven with Dee and with Stephanie and
That's
with so many others, So heavenly places on the physical part, or rather here on earth, I would say, in my opinion, would be the church.
Yeah, definitely.
And
This side of eternity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where my mind goes is talking about, you go back to Ephesians 1, and it talks about us being heirs together with him. And it just kind of jumps, from my mind, it jumps over to Romans 8. And you go back to that passage I mentioned earlier, like 12 through 17. And it talks about how we receive the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him, in order that we may also be glorified with him. And I think about that honor in Acts when the apostles are imprisoned. They rejoiced because they counted it an honor to suffer with him. And I just think about... really, in my mind, that's where it goes. Just the honor that it is to be heirs alongside Christ, which, as members of the church, we do that with our brothers and sisters here, as you both said.
Yeah. It says that so that he may show the exceeding riches of his grace and his kindness. So, how? Like, what is grace?
So... I'm hoping that this doesn't sound super crazy, but the definition that I wrote down is that grace is a non-discriminate or a universal expression of God's sacrificial love. Does that make any sense to y'all?
It's a lot of long words. Say that again.
Grace is a non-discriminate, meaning it's to everyone, no matter what age of the earth you live in or have lived in, no matter your gender, your age, your race. So non-discriminate or universal, it applies to all, expression of God's sacrificial love.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. You put it in English for me. So now...
It was all in English.
It was, but those were some
That's
big
the only language I know.
Some big words.
One word, non-discriminate. I get you. And I also wrote down a more... which I felt was way too watered down, but God doing something for us because he loves us in spite of us destroying our own lives.
I like that.
See,
You like that better? Cool, glad to hear that.
I like
But
that
then
watery version.
I shared something on Facebook this week, and I was talking to Rick about this, and it just made me laugh. And it's like a little picture with words on it, and it says, me yelling at birds in the street to move so they don't die is the same feeling God probably has watching me live my life. I was like, that's just perfect.
Yeah, that is perfect.
Yeah, I like that. I like the watery version.
Okay, good. We'll stick with that one then.
Never think your stuff is watered down, Stephanie. It is not.
Oh, well, thanks.
All right, so I have for grace, this is what I came up with. I think I may have said this in an earlier episode too. A love so deep to the point of death that it gives life.
Yes,
Yes,
I like
okay,
it.
I got that.
Okay, so verse 8, it says that, for by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. This verse, I think, is the most misused or misquoted, or one of the most misused and misquoted verses in the Bible. So I'm going to start from the end, the end of the verse. So we know that grace is the gift of God. Mm-hmm. It comes from him, by him, through him. It's, like it says, it's of him. It's a gift of him. So we are saved by grace. So in other words, we cannot be saved without him and his grace, right? But the key words here are through faith. You know, I've heard it said many times, we're saved by grace. Yes, we are, but there's more to that verse. It's through faith. So how do you explain saved by grace through faith?
All right, so when you think about it and you think about about grace, I think, again, it kind of plays off mercy as well. So we are worthy of death because of our sin. So there's nothing that we could have done, or at this very point that we can do to save ourselves. It's because of God's mercy and compassion and grace that we can be saved. But realizing that we can only be saved through Him, like we can't. There's nothing that we can do on our own. So when we realize how much God truly loves us and how lost we are without Him, then we can understand God's grace or His desire to help us, or as individuals who can't help ourselves. So that's how I want to answer the first part, like how do you explain saved by grace, before we move on to the second part. Does anybody else have anything? Maybe I confused that a little.
So to me, grace is the motive. God's grace brings salvation, and faith is the method. Without faith, you're just going through the motions, and it's not going to last. It just, even if it's a habit, it's not, the motive doesn't help you any. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay, so now if we answer the second part, how do you explain saved through faith? If we reread verse 8, for by the grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of work, so that no one may boast. So when I think about what faith is, everybody kind of knows the traditional text, which is Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen, which sounds all well and good, and it is good, but how do you explain faith to someone, right? And so then I thought about the parable in Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 10, about the centurion and his servant being sick, right? And so he sends his people to Jesus, and he tells Jesus, my servant is sick, come. And then so Jesus comes to him, but the centurion stops him and says, hey, you're not worthy. I'm not worthy to have you walk into my house, but instead, rather just say the word, and I know because you are a person of authority, with the moment that you say it, he will be healed. Mm-hmm. And I thought, man, that's a really good image of faith, I think the same would be true in our prayer life. We don't know how God's going to work it out. We know He's not doing anything miraculous. Everything now is providential, but we don't know how everything is going to work out. But if I pray to Him, I have faith that at some point He will answer accordingly. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I wrote down that faith is belief paired with trust.
Yeah.
You believe it to be true, and you trust that it will come about.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of what I was asking y'all earlier. Can we know that we're saved? Yes, we can know that. Along with what you said, Brittany, I thought of the woman who had the flow of blood for 12 years.
Yeah.
Her faith was shown in where, she just wanted to get near enough to touch the hem, and she knew she would be healed.
Yeah.
So, yeah, good point. Anything else? Yeah? Okay. So verses 9 and 10, not of works, lest anyone should boast, for we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. So, not of works. So this is not a result of our works. Why then would Paul say we are created for good works?
We were created to glorify God, right? Mm-hmm. And good works are kind of an extension of who we are as Christians. If you'll go to 2 Corinthians 9 in verse 6, where he's talking about giving. And in verse 8 he says, and God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. And he goes on for the rest of that chapter and talks about how God supplies people with things, which provides for them, but also it helps them provide for others.
So like Stephanie, I thought about Matthew 5:16 as well. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. And then it goes back to your previous question, how do you explain being saved through faith? You know, I have faith that if I do these things that God has commanded me to do because I love him, then I will have or be able to live with him for all eternity. And I think also when we do these good works, it not only shows our obedience to Christ, but like Stephanie said, it's a way to encourage others and also point others to the cross. You know, like they would say, it points people back to the cross, and that's our whole point of living. You know, we think about the Great Commission as well, going to all the world and to preach the gospel. You know, that there are different ways of doing that looks different. Everybody has a different talent of some sort, but at the end of the day, these good works that we are doing are all talents that have been given to us by God that ultimately are to be used to point people back to him, and in the process encourage us and strengthen us, because if we study our Bibles like we're supposed to and we act on these things, you know, continue to walk in the light, continue to allow the blood of Christ to cleanse us even when we mess up, it gives us strength. And I think it's also a good reminder, like, okay, I'm not just working for anything, you know, I'm working towards something. And in the process of me working, I'm being obedient to the one I know who has come to save me. I'm being obedient to his word. I'm also in the process allowing my light to be seen by those who are lost in the world. But ultimately, I know it's not me who I want them to see. It's who lives in me that I want them to see.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I thought about, as you were talking, about those good works being mercy and grace. I mean, if we're going to be Christ-like, we also have to extend the mercy to others that he extends to us, and the grace, you know, say for mercy, like you said earlier, Stephanie, you know, this person over there, he's done me wrong, so he needs to be punished. Well, we need to extend that mercy like Christ extends it to us. And the grace also, you know, for like towards new Christians, maybe, you know, if they don't know everything, I mean, we don't know everything either, but, you know, we will be on a different level of our faith at that point than a new Christian. So we need to extend the grace towards them to help them along and teach them. And just like Christ continuously and God continuously extends that to us, teaching us and making us perfect. So I thought of that.
And the longer I live, the more I value that grace and mercy.
Oh, yeah.
Like, my father passed last year, and we were fine. Everything was fine, but we weren't close. And so all of a sudden, it's almost like it takes on this new flavor. Like, I don't want to hold anything ever against anybody, because I don't know when they're gone, and I don't want to think. And I wasn't actually actively holding anything against him at that point or anything like that. But my whole life led up to that point, and we just didn't have the relationship we could have, partially because of him and all the things he'd done and the life he lived. And it was very traumatic. But then me, at first not extending that grace, and then eventually extending it, but not feeling like I could work backward to a point where we could enjoy the fruits of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Brittany, any more?
No. Do you have another question?
Okay. I've been presented with a question in Bible studies before. Isn't faith a work?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it
What did you
is.
say?
I said no.
Why would you say no?
Okay, so I went to James 2 for this. In verse 14, it says, "What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him?" And while I look at it this way, faith and works are not synonymous. They are symbiotic.
Another big word.
Yes, and I'll explain it. Sorry. They're harmonious, and to me, you know, when you look at symbiosis in science, just lovely big words today. Sorry, but that's literally where my mind jumped immediately, was symbiosis. When you have a symbiotic relationship, these things are working together to provide what's needed. And faith and works need each other. That's what James chapter 2 is about once it starts in 14 and goes basically through the end of the chapter. And it talks about how, you cannot have faith without works, and works without faith are basically meaningless as well. And it provides Rahab and Abraham as examples. But faith in God leads to salvation, which bears fruit of good works. Salvation is not the fruit of those good works, though. Does that make sense? Or am I just confusing everybody?
Crickets.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, then you're saying faith is not a work because you can't work without having faith, is what you're saying.
Kinda. I guess.
Okay. So the way that I thought about it was I immediately went to Hebrews 11:6, and without faith it is impossible to please him, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seeks them. So I say that faith is a work, yes, because in order to have that faith, I have to believe in God. And in order to believe in God, I have to be, not that I feel as if my faith alone will save me, because it won't. I know that I have to, it's God who saves me. But I would say that the faith, in my opinion, is a work because I am working, like I have to, my faith has to be built. You get what I'm saying? So I think I get what you're saying as far as, and everybody who's listening, it's okay to agree to disagree. We're all still friends and we all still love each other. So, but in my opinion, the way that I was thinking it and how my mind was working, however it decides to work, is faith is a work because I am working to always make sure that I believe in God. Like I know I believe in him, but through studying my Bible and being encouraged by others, it kind of reminds me why I have the faith that I have and why I believe in God the way that I do, if that makes sense. That's how I thought about it.
Yeah. I thought about it as, okay, so our salvation, his grace is free, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I had, okay, poor example, but a $20 bill, okay? If I set it right here on the table, so Brittany, it's yours for the taking. It's free. You don't have to do anything except you got to come get it. Well, if you want it, you're going to come get it, right? You believe in me that I'm going to give you this $20. All you had to do is get up and get it. Well, you're getting up and getting it because you believe that you're going to get it to me as a work. While we don't earn our salvation, it's still offered. And we still have to have faith that is offered, and we believe that we're going to get it if we take it.
Mm-hmm. And you still have to do something.
Yeah.
In order.
Right.
So like,
yeah.
Which I'm saying you still have to do something. I'm just saying the faith isn't the doing.
Right.
it's
Like
not a
oh,
It's
word.
not the action, is what I'm
right, got
saying.
you.
Okay.
So faith alone just isn't, it's not just a physical work.
No, it's not. That's not. I thought that's what we meant. Like,
Oh, okay,
is
yeah.
faith a work? No, faith itself is not the work.
Right.
I got you now.
Got
Faith.
you, okay.
That's why I said it's symbiotic. You have to. You have to have both.
Yes, which I agree with that. I
Yeah,
completely
I do
agree
too.
with that.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's how I was thinking. Not that faith is a physical work; it is a
Yeah.
spiritual work, though. But I feel. Do you feel it's a spiritual work?
I mean, it requires work. Yeah,
Yeah. So, okay.
but I wouldn't. Yeah, I don't. That's the thing. I don't think I would ever say that the faith is the work part, especially because in James 2, it separates it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, faith without works, and then in verse 22, when it talks about Abraham. It says, you see that faith was active along with his works.
Yeah.
So,
So like Abraham, he had faith. God told him, get up, move. Didn't know where he was going. He knew God was going to take care of him. He knew God was going to provide for him. That is his faith. He had to act upon that faith by
right,
getting up and moving.
Yeah.
Okay.
That faith motivates you
Yeah.
to do the action that's required.
Okay. All right. I get that.
Yeah.
I get that.
Sorry. I
Okay, so
confused.
it's the faith. Well, because you came in here with symbiotic. It was like, what?
And symbiosis.
Yeah.
What is this?
Yeah. Sorry. Very literal.
Okay, so like I said, verse 10 was the crescendo. The verses 4 through 7 built up to this crescendo of we are his workmanship, and this is so wonderful. It's just so ending this episode, how or where did you see the love of Christ?
In verse 5 is where I saw it. Even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved. And I just thought to myself, whew.
Yes.
I mean, I feel like if more people really understood that, I don't know, I feel like everybody would be baptized.
Yeah,
That's how I think about it. It's just like, if, and I'm only 30 rural, so, it's not like I've lived the longest life, but I have done things in my 20s and even in my teen years. I would say then I was accountable. I understood right from wrong. There were certain things that I knew I understood, and even when I was doing them, I knew them to be wrong, but it's the lust of the flesh. It's the pride of, like, it's what I wanted to do, but it was like, even when all of that was going on, I still was worthy and still am worthy to be saved. But I have to want it, And like we said earlier, it's free.
Yeah.
Anybody can have it. And so I just thought, who doesn't love free stuff, Especially when it allows you to live for all eternity. Who wouldn't want that, So that's definitely where I saw it.
Yeah. Which, when you ask the question, I'm like, where don't you see it in this passage? I mean, it's all over every single verse. And I thought, I do think what Brittany thinks about the fact that we were dead and he still did it anyways. But also, when you look through verses 1 through 3, he loved us enough to let us choose. He didn't force it on us. Mm-hmm. He gives us the free will to choose. And so, being how we are, our finite minds that want to do what we want to do, that's what that fleshly desire is all about, the lust of the flesh, passions, cravings, whatever you want to call it. Knowing that we are how we are, he provides us an alternative that is better for us. Because while the world looks on all the things that we talked about between 1 Corinthians and then the passage that Brittany brought up in Galatians 5, all those things, the world looks at those and they say, that's really living right there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But we know better than that, because we're told in several passages, and I think about that passage in Matthew 23 that we discussed last episode, where he talks about the Pharisees outside. On the outside, they appear beautiful, but they're whitewashed tombs. Inside, they're full of dead men's bones. Yeah. And that's not how we want to live our lives as Christians, but God had to show us a better way. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's where I see it.
Good. I see it both in what you both said. Verse 4, he's rich in mercy. Mm-hmm. He wants us to live. He wants us to live with him. He doesn't want to punish us like we deserve. So that's where I saw the love of Christ is being rich in mercy. I mean, he went to the cross for us. So, that free gift.
Yeah. And I think about it when I was studying for this. One of the questions you asked is, can we know his love? Can we understand his love? Mm-hmm. I thought, not really, not on the whole scale. But all of us in here have kids. Mm-hmm. And so in that limited sense as parents, we can understand that, how wonderful it is to see that child grow and learn, and to watch them as they stumble and kind of fear for them, but know that you're also providing a way for them to work it out. Mm-hmm. And of course, we're nowhere near the love of God. Yeah. But I think, through that, we can kind of see how forgiveness works and how it is to know that as a parent, I pick up my child and I comfort them when they've done that. Mm-hmm. And God does that for me every single day.
Yeah. All right. Well, great. It's been another good episode, I thought. We want to thank you again for joining us on To Know the Love of Christ. And we hope that in your daily walk and in your daily life, you will see God's grace and his mercy and the riches of his mercy and his kindness. And you too will want to know the love of Christ. Thank you.